Wouldn't you hate it if you were driving down the road and you were speeding and you knew you were speeding and then you got pulled over by a policeman? But when the policeman pulled you over, he didn't give you a ticket for speeding, he gave you a ticket for robbing a bank. We know that wouldn't make any sense at all. Sometimes we're confused by a very simple verse in the book of James, and we make a little more of it than really what I think it means in its total interpretation. In James chapter 2, verse 10, it says, "For whoever shall keep the whole law and yet stumble in one point, he is guilty of all." Now we need to be careful that we don't make that verse actually say more than it actually says. It's in a context dealing with how we treat other people, and we'll discuss that a little more at a later point. But you have to understand that there's a principle here about the law that is comprehensive, and that what it appears that the Holy Spirit is trying to communicate to us through the author James is that there are no little laws with God. There are no little sins with God. There are no little commandments with God. Everything means the same to God because He's the great lawgiver. And after all, we have to also remember that if we violate one law, if we compromise one commandment, what's that eventually going to lead to? Well, it's probably going to lead to the violating and compromising of another commandment, and then another commandment. You see, we can't live a life with just one sin as our pet sin that we continually do and continue to live righteously in all the other areas of our life. That simply does not equate with itself. It's kind of like in a house, you have all kinds of wood. You have trusses and joists and 2x4s and supporting walls of all kinds of different architectural types. And suppose you have just one 2x4, one floor joist go bad. Well, that's probably not that big a problem at first, but what will eventually happen? Eventually that will weaken the next one, and eventually that will weaken the next one, and pretty soon the whole system will be compromised. It might take a long time, but the whole system will be compromised to the point that it all collapses. You see, when we begin to violate one law, one command, we can compromise our spiritual system so much that eventually it all collapses.